I'm thankful that political ads have gone away. Not that I watch a lot of TV, but man, there were days. So thankful for my daughter who just was trying to call me. Do you have anything to be thankful for today on Thankful Thursday as we gear up for HomeNE?
I'm going to be thankful for Record because I cannot get the live stream to work.
Oh,
There we go.
okay.
Advanced sharing.
And personally, you might be thankful for.
I'm thankful my daughter didn't go into labor while we were in North Platte. How's that?
Okay.
I want to be here when she goes into labor.
Yeah. So Sherry was on baby watch while we were in North Platte for a couple days. So welcome to those of you who are continuing to join us. I see you on my screen here. If this is your first HomeNE, wonderful. We're glad to have you here. If it's one of many, awesome. We love to have you return and soak up the knowledge that our speakers share. So does anybody have anything that they want to share on Thankful Thursday? I just thought of another one. I don't have to cook for Thanksgiving. That's why the daughter was calling just now. She's hosting. So I might just put it in the chat box. Gary, do you have anything you want to share?
Well, I'm thankful the Huskers are finally going to go back to a bowl game after this weekend. So
Okay, you're banking on our quarterback's promise. Is that what you're telling me?
there you go.
Yep. He said we'll make it this season, so
We got to get the monkey off our back sooner or later, right?
yep, at some point, some guy I follow said, why is it so hard to get to a bowl game? So, but yeah. So Gary's thankful we're going to a bowl this season if you're a Husker fan. So we'll start here in about 2 or 3 minutes. So I would love to hear from all of you. What are you thankful for on this Thankful Thursday? I know we have a lot of people who will join us at the last minute, but we're 1 week from Thanksgiving, so which happens to be one of my favorite holidays. So maybe that's why I'm so eager to hear what everyone is thankful for.
Me and Bernardo are here, and hi.
Hello.
Hi, Lori. We are thankful, I guess, for a very good, successful year.
Nice. Yes. Thank you
Very
for
good.
sharing that.
Yeah, it was
Pardon me?
amazing year. It was amazing year.
Good, good.
We broke records and very excited about to see what 2025 is gonna bring.
I love that optimism. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Professionally, personally, it was a good year. So,
Yes.
okay. Thank you. Bev says she's thankful for life, family, friends, and sunshine. And she's with the Bertrand Area Community Builders. So thank you, Beverly, for sharing that. What else? Does anybody else have anything to share?
It's called BioAg Solutions in Hershey.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that's my nephew.
Oh, for crying out loud. Yeah, he's a great guy.
He moved out there from Seward.
Yeah. Well, the guy that owns it is a really good guy. So
yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's my nephew, Adam. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll give just one more minute. I hear people joining and seeing people joining us, and then Gary, we'll get started, okay? So,
Okay,
but
fire away.
I'll get us going and turn it over to you here shortly. But we'll give one more minute and then we will start. But I'm looking forward to it. Okay, well, let's get rolling, shall we? So welcome. Thank you to all of you who have joined our November 2024 edition of the HomeNE Learning Network. Excuse me. I'm Lori Ferguson. I'm a community consultant here at South Central Economic Development District in Holdridge. We serve as the lead agent for the HomeNE Learning Network, and HomeNE is designed for all people throughout Nebraska to come together and share ideas, discuss problems, listen and learn from each other. And we have a great speaker today who's going to share a lot of wonderful information. If you've been eavesdropping, our staff, as well as the other economic development districts, were in North Platte yesterday and this morning, and Gary was our opening speaker, and just so exciting to hear about all that's going on in North Platte. Not only economic development, but housing development. So I'm looking forward to what he's going to share. We've noticed that we have new people that continue to register. So as I said earlier, if this is your first time joining HomeNE, we welcome you. Feel free to use the chat box and ask questions of Gary and or Sherry or myself as the hour progresses. So HomeNE is to provide a setting for all of you that provides face-to-face as well as online opportunities to foster interaction, engagement, and skill building for the local individuals who are passionate about addressing the housing shortage in their communities. And it also hopefully empowers and encourages all of you as participants to apply what you're learning through the different avenues that are being made available to you through HomeNE. So today we're joined by, as I mentioned, Gary Pearson of the North Platte Chamber and Development Corporation office. I don't know what he does in his spare time. It sounds like he has a lot going on. And if he would share his vitamin regimen, I would be happy to take it because he has a lot of irons in the fire. So he's joining us to discuss how North Platte has utilized tax increment financing as a tool in housing development. So Gary, before we begin, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, though you're probably very familiar to many of us, and just share a little bit about yourself, about your work, and then we'll have you get started, okay?
Okay, Lori. Well, thank you for the introduction and the kind words. It's a lot of pressure to live up to, but we'll give her a shot. I'm just an old farm ranch kid that grew up in the far end of western Nebraska and worked farming and ranching all as a kid growing up, and worked my way through college. Went into the newspaper business because that seemed to be our only communication tool back in when I was growing up in very rural area of Nebraska. So it always kind of fascinated me, and I spent about 10 years in the newspaper business and was editor of 3 different newspapers. That got me into the Chamber of Commerce work, got real involved in the community and the JCs, and that really helped give me the training, some of the leadership skills to kind of move forward. And then I had an opportunity to be the director of the Western Office of the Governor under Kay Orr. Then when the election didn't work out for her for a re-election term, I formed a public relations company, and it wasn't a short time thereafter the community of Sydney hired me to be their economic development director. I served that role for 23 years, and a little bit a ways into that, the city manager had left, and the community talked me into being the city manager, but continue on with the economic development role, which like a dumb old country kid, I just said, okay, here we go. So it was a tremendous learning experience. It really did help give me the background to know how development should occur and all the intricate details that you have to do to move projects through the process. I came to North Platte 9 years ago to be the president CEO of a combined Chamber of Commerce and an Economic Development Corporation. That's kind of a unique concept. We make it work very well. We have 660 business members. We do all the city and the county's economic development. Got a lot of great volunteers involved, and we've been on a pretty good roll the last 5 years. And Lori and the other folks that attended the workshop up in North Platte heard about all the exciting projects. We got about $2.3 billion of projects that have either been built or are emerging in process or in the final planning stages. And part of that, with all the new jobs that we've been able to create here, kind of reinvent our downtown, revitalize our mall, recruit a lot of new industry businesses into town. Then we're facing this brutal reality that, you know, you can't fully grasp or embrace everything you've created unless you work on housing and workforce, and one doesn't happen without the other. So a lot of the speculation and all the the hard sell of trying to get people to bring developers into North Platte and do housing projects, it's kind of disappeared now that we've created the jobs. Large employer Sustainable Beef will be opening in April this spring, and 900 more jobs will come along with that, and probably 400 or 500 ancillary jobs or support businesses, and then just all the other growth that we're experiencing here. We're also developing an industrial rail park. So what I was asked to do is, because this issue seems to haunt everybody in rural Nebraska, and that's the housing issue, and how do we wrap our arms around that challenge? And it's the only way you're going to revitalize your communities or grow your communities or sustain your school systems or your communities. You just can't do it without housing. And in my long experience of doing community and economic development, I've had to basically recruit people from the outside to convince them to invest in the communities that I've represented. And no housing developer will talk to you in today's world. Everybody says, we're just a great community. We got all this great rural lifestyle and, good welcoming folks. But that doesn't cut it. They have to be able to make it work financially for them to invest and to build housing. And one of the best things, probably the most effective tool, and one that you're going to have in your arsenal if you're going to get housing accomplished in your community, is to use the tool called tax increment financing. And one disclaimer, I am not an attorney, so what I'm going to go over today, the details, comes from my experiences, and it's called, I did my first TIF project in 1991. So I've got close to 35 years of scars and bruises and been through every battle you can imagine. I've faced hostile crowds and people who refuse to understand that ugly term blight and substandard, and the use of a tax incentive to build housing. But for the most part, won most of those battles and eventually convinced the people it's the right thing to do. And the beauty that I think that TIF represents is that you create something out of nothing. You're not using other resources that already exist that could go to other purposes in your community. You're putting together a plan that will use the investors, the builder, the developer, the redevelopers investment into the housing to recapture taxes for a short period of time to help pay for the infrastructure being sewer, water, streets, stormwater, acquisition of site, land, and anything that you could consider a public accommodation does qualify. So just to make sure everybody has kind of a little bit of background and understanding how TIF came to be, it was actually created through a community development law that goes clear back to 1950 in the state of Nebraska, but for the most part was never used much. outside of the metropolitan areas of Lincoln and Omaha, which it was then became kind of known as urban renewal. But it has been statutorily available through this community development law going back that far. I never really saw it used much in rural Nebraska until the 1990s. It started to emerge as a tool for communities to use. And you have to be inside an incorporated municipality to be able to use it. It's not allowed in rural areas, and that's all by constitution in the state of Nebraska. Like I had mentioned, it finances infrastructure for redevelopment projects. It truly has to be what's considered a redevelopment project. And it has to be in what they consider a substandard and blight zone. And the authorization is contained in the Nebraska Constitution. Go ahead for the next slide. So if your community does not have a substandard, a blight and substandard study that's been adopted, there are several steps you have to go through as a community, and you have to form a community redevelopment authority or a community development agency that has to be done by the local governing municipality, whether it be a village board of trustees or city council or whatever the governing entity is known as, but it has to be created to oversee specifically redevelopment projects. So once that is created, the next step is to go and conduct a community blight and substandard study. There's a number of consultants in the state of Nebraska that will come to your community. They will do an entire community assessment on where the areas are that would qualify for this. But most Nebraska communities being well over 100 years of age, most of the areas of your community will qualify, because one of the standards is if it's inside the incorporated city limits for 40 years, it does meet some of the qualifying standards. And all of this is in statute, what qualifies as blight and what qualifies as substandard. And you have to meet both litmus tests to be able to qualify an area for substandard blight. And once the study is done, you don't have to necessarily designate everything it says is eligible. You can kind of piecemeal it together over time. And as projects make sense, go ahead and then blight it at that time. It's the hardest thing for the public to understand because they think that's an evil, evil word. There's been movements to try to change the terminology, but that has to be done by a vote of the people because it's part of the Constitution. And there's never been any success in being able to do that. But if they would define it as an area for renewed development or something like that, I think it would sell a lot better because that seems to be a real sticking point for people. Go ahead, next step, next slide. So to get once the study is done, you have to have a public hearing before the Planning Commission. First of all, you refer it to the Planning Commission, or they refer it to the governing board, the city council or village board. They send it back to the Planning Commission for a public hearing. Planning Commission determines if it meets your community's comprehensive plan. So if you don't have a comprehensive plan, that also needs to be done prior to the time that you can do any of this. The Planning Commission then makes a recommendation to the governing board. The governing board being the city council or the village board of trustees. They hold another public hearing, and then they can adopt the study and declare which areas they want to designate substandard and blighted. Once that is done, that's an invitation to developers that says, hey, the community is willing to provide this incentive for you should you want to invest in our community in this particular area. It's always better if you have a developer lined up that has a project ready than just to have it sit there. But you can go ahead and be proactive and do all this prior to the time you have a project. It's just sometimes simpler for people to understand if you do have a project. There is a restriction on the amount of footprint in your community, the acreage in your community within the boundaries. 35% of that can be up to 35% can be blight and substandard in a first-class community. That's communities over 5,000 population. Communities, I think it's between 1,500 and 5,000, or it has to be 50%. In villages, which are smaller than that, you can have up to 100% of your entire community blighted if your political jurisdiction would allow it. Every redevelopment plan, which has to be specific to individual projects that come forward, they have to outline all the objectives that are found in the statute on how it's going to improve public utilities, access to different community functions, improve traffic, but mostly it's the area that's being defined is not considered desirable for development, so because it lacks several of those things, like street, sewer, water, site preparation. It might be a raw piece of ground that's been blighted that doesn't have any of these amenities that developers need to make work. So go ahead, Lori, go on to the next one. So these are just additional steps you have to go through then. One of the other things that has to be done, other than the things I've already talked about, is the cost benefit analysis for each project has to take place for projects that analyzes several factors and also tells the governing body then how many, what the new investment's going to create in the amount of new taxes that could be collected. And then that goes through an approval process. It does have to also pass what they call the but-for test. And it's but for the fact that you're willing to do tax increment financing, this project is not economically feasible to go forward. And so that has to be proven in the process. And there's a number of ways you can do that. But the TIF proceeds can help with acquiring the site, doing all the public improvements, removing existing structures, help with architectural costs, engineering costs, legal costs. If you have to do a blight study, that can qualify as well. So there's all kinds of things that could be recaptured to show where the fund is going to go through or go towards, and you have to identify that. Some of it's guesswork, but it's educated guesswork based on engineering estimates. Go ahead, Lori. Okay, once it then goes back to the Community Redevelopment Authority, that agency, and it can be an independent agency appointed by the council, or the city council or village board could choose to be what's called a community development agency and also serve in that capacity. The statute gives you both options. So the person coming in with the redevelopment project and the CRA basically negotiate the terms of the project and what the community is willing to do, and the amount they're willing to say qualifies over a 15-year period of time allowed within the law. So what happens is the existing value of wherever this project's going to go always stays at that value and still goes to all of the different political subdivisions. The new value, whatever that's projected to create in new taxes over the next 15 years, can get recaptured to leverage the project by issuing bonds. The bonds have to be issued through the CRA, and then that gives the developer money up front to do all these projects. And then as they continue to pay taxes on their new project over the next 15 years, it's recaptured at the county level, sent to the village or city, and then distributed to the bondholder. And the city holds the bonds on knowing where who's entitled to receive that. So that could be the developer themselves, it could be the bank that's involved in it, or it could be somebody that bought the bonds for different various tax purposes. And that's how it then provides that gap money that a bank wouldn't necessarily be able to do upfront or willing to do, because the project didn't make any financial sense without doing TIF. Go ahead. So now we're going to talk about the 4 different types of TIF that now exist in the state of Nebraska. And 3 of them are relatively new. So not many communities have much experience with those programs yet. But I think the legislature and Senator Williams out of Gothenburg was extremely instrumental in some of these coming about. But we've had the traditional TIF that I talked about since going clear back to the 1950s. I think the very first TIF project in the state of Nebraska done is where the Cornhusker Marriott Hotel is. So that just gives you a little historic perspective of the type of things that the project can do. Then one of the newer TIF programs is workforce housing TIF. And this is one that you can qualify more expenses if you adopt workforce housing along with the traditional TIF. You have to do two different public hearings, but it also limits the amount of the sale price or the rent price for projects built with workforce housing TIF. So the whole idea there was it buys down the cost of the housing to make it more acceptable to people in the workforce. Then they recently adopted, and this is by a vote of the people in the state of Nebraska on a petition. It went to the ballot. They approved that if areas qualify for extreme blight, it can be for up to 20 years recapturing the tax proceeds. And then a program called Micro TIF, which is supposed to simplify it for the small developer and get away from some of the cumbersome steps and lengthy process that traditional TIF does. But that is totally limited to 15 years. Now we'll talk a little bit about each one of those 3 new programs. Go ahead. So workforce housing TIF came about from a 2018 legislative bill 496 sponsored by Senator Williams, and it's only communities of less than 100,000 population, which is everybody except Lincoln and Omaha. That's why they call it rural workforce housing TIF. It's for owner-occupied housing, and I don't know if they've upped these standards. I knew there was a problem initially when they kept raising the standard considered workforce housing. They didn't bring along this particular program with it, so that may have been adjusted. Originally, it was $275,000. I know workforce housing now is considered up to $325,000, so that may have changed. And if you do rental units, you have to have spent less than $200,000 per unit in constructing or rehabbing a structure, and that is now at $250,000 if they have adopted it to make it work for this program as well. If you do a rehab project, it can't exceed 50% of the current project's or structure's assessed value. Can be used for upper store housing in our downtown areas. Like I said, additional public hearing is required, and it goes to basically reduce the overall cost of the housing. The traditional TIF does too, but this puts it in statute that you have that limitation. So what's extreme blight? So every time that the federal government does a census, they do it by census tracts. Those tracts have a certain, they have all different types of information that is available from those census tracts. So it has to be an area of the community that's already been blighted, already been substandard and blighted before it can be considered for extreme blight. Average rate of unemployment in the area has to be 200% of the state average. The average poverty rate has to exceed 20% of the last federal census tract. It could be used for only workforce housing only and the same standards. And I believe that those have also now risen to those other levels. And then the housing unit costs are up. This changes, the standard changes every year that the consumer price index comes forward. So if you're going to do a project like that, you just need to see what the latest standards are before you actually do a project. But most of that work's already been done in those census tracts. And one thing we're going to bring forward in North Platte is we have a huge area of our north side of the community that would automatically qualify if the city council would adopt that whole zone as extreme blighted. The other thing it does is it removes that percentage out of the restricted amount that can be included. For instance, North Platte can do up to 35% of its entire community as substandard and blighted. Anything that's extreme blighted doesn't count against that 35% standard. So that's another advantage to go ahead and doing that if you can withstand the politics involved in somebody that hears that now they're going to be living in an extremely blighted neighborhood. Everybody thinks that affects their values, their resale. There's no basis for that argument whatsoever. If anything, it makes it more attractive for developers because it tells them people are now willing to invest new dollars in those areas of the community that probably haven't had new investment in it for who knows how long. Then micro-TIF was adopted in 2020 and expanded in 2022, and it's still being perfected and modified. This is actually a prior North Platte senator that introduced this. He basically hated TIF. He thought it was for the big corporations, and he wanted something for the little guy. So he came up with this program, micro-TIF, and our current state senator has perfected it to make it more usable, especially for the banking community. But municipality has to adopt a plan that says they will allow for micro-TIF projects to occur in blight zones. And the whole idea is not to run them through this lengthy process with the Community Redevelopment Authority, doing a study, doing a go through the Planning Commission, City Council, back and forth 2 or 3 times before you get it approved. This is supposed to, community would adopt the plan, would have a application process, and whatever village official is assigned to that, somebody that wanted to do micro-TIF would come in, fill out the application. If you want to go to the next slide, Lori, it kind of tell you what some of the things that I'm going to ask for. It has to identify the property, tell about the uses and condition it currently has, what the proposed uses are. You have to make sure it's in a blighted area. It has to be within the city limits for 60 years. Now, if a vacant lot is somewhere in your community and it's been inside the village or the city for 60 years and has never been developed, it is also eligible for this. And then you have to project what the new valuation is going to be once you redevelop the project. And then that is applications taken to your governing board, and then they can approve it with just one transaction rather than like 8, 9, 10 transactions or steps in a process like traditional TIF. And so communities can modify that in any way that they feel comfortable with. But the limitations are you can't create something that's greater than $350,000 for a single family house. And if you do a commercial project, it can't be greater than 1.5 million unless it's on the National Historic Register. Say you have a grand old hotel in town that's sitting there not in useful condition, and somebody wanted to take that challenge on and happen to be on the Historic Register, you could qualify for up to $10 million on that project. And it hasn't not been used very extensively. I know of maybe 4 or 5 communities in Nebraska that have done micro-TIF. We're starting to see it become a real factor in North Platte because it's such a simplified process. and it's really going to help rehab a lot of structures that wouldn't necessarily otherwise get rehabbed. We've been able to do 2 upper floor downtown projects, going to create 20 new housing units. Both of them use micro TIF. We have somebody that took an old abandoned motel that actually had to be evacuated because of the substandard utilities that were deficient and caving in. And we have a developer out of Omaha that came out, got it micro TIF, and now he's going to put it back into a useful efficiency apartments. And we'll probably have 50, 75 apartments there, especially for our emerging workforce. We have so many new jobs coming in, and it'll present very temporary housing, but at least it's housing. And so it can be used in a lot of applicable ways to really help a community address some real blight areas of the community. So that, in a nutshell, is the 4 types of TIF and my non-legal opinion on how to use it. And I find it to be a very, very effective tool, again, because you create something out of nothing. And that's the beauty of it.
Okay. Gary, we neglected to put a slide with your contact information. So while I'm thinking about that, how can people reach you? And then we're going to have some Q&A here for you, but can you just share your contact information and we can put it in the chat box as you share? Oh, Sherry
Sure.
already put your email in.
Yeah, that's probably the best way. And or you could always call the North Platte Chamber Development Office here. It's 308-532-4966. The email's the best. We're probably not going to have email for the rest of today, though. I just want to tell our system went down. So, but if you drop me an email, I'll be happy to try to point you in the right direction doing it. But I would probably the first thing to do is I would meet with your village clerk, or if you have a city administrator or somebody that kind of serves in that role, or your local mayor, and try to get them on board to looking at, especially programs like micro TIF can be not so costly and it's easier to understand. And but there's a lot of resources out there that can help your communities.
Good. I'm getting some questions in my chat box. So
yep.
Dina wants to know a couple things. The first question is, what is the most creative way that you've used tax increment financing?
Well, I'll tell you, they're all creative. Been beat
what
up.
Is one? Go ahead.
Well, I've done everything from a Fortune 500 company corporate headquarters to upper floor housing in the historic downtown. So I've seen the full gamut of how it's used. Okay. But I would say between my experience in Sydney and here in North Platte, where I've been part of projects that have created about 3,000 new housing units, not one of those projects happened without tax increment financing. And it was multiple different projects of all sizes. We were the first community ever to do the workforce housing TIF too, on using the vertical. And that helped build 248 new housing units, built 80 to start with, and 10 8-plexes. They were so successful and filled up so fast that the developer built another 120. They're now all filled. And so he's ventured forward with another project to build 48 with a little larger footprint, doing 3 bedrooms instead of 1 and 2 bedroom. So that's, but it hadn't been for that workforce housing TIF, I don't know that he would have just done it with traditional TIF to keep it at the rent levels that are attractive for the workforce, because costs are so high. Sustainable beef project, we took an old abandoned lagoon, a big giant poop hole, for lack of a better term, and built a $425 million state-of-the-art beef processing plant that will open in April and employ 900 people. So if you want to talk about creativity, that was probably my hardest sell to tell somebody they're going to put their investment in that particular area, but it definitely qualified for tax increment financing. It was substandard and blighted, and it checked a lot of the other boxes because it was near the interstate for truck traffic coming in and out. It was away from the community in general, in case the stigma that the people tend to think they smell. Today's technology, that's really mitigated, was sitting right beside other city active lagoons who already smell. So, so it's a wide gamut. But it's probably one of the first things when people approach me, because I kind of have this reputation of being able to get projects to the starting gate and to the finish line, and then understanding how all these laws work. That's probably one of the first things that attracts them to us.
Okay, good. A couple more questions are filtering in. What's one change you would like to see with TIF in Nebraska?
The terminology, changing it,
How
getting
so?
a different definition than substandard blight.
Okay.
You could have the same qualifying standards, just call it something different, because that tends to dominate the conversation in public hearings. People just adamantly hate that terminology. That I think would help resolve a lot of things. I think too many people have tried to tinker with the law over time, both the opponents and proponents. Every time they try to make it simpler, somebody else is trying to make it more difficult. They used to be able to divert like 10% of a TIF project into a community fund to use for other purposes. But we had a state senator put a stop to that, and he got the law changed. I think that was a good thing for communities to have, because there's so many other more uses. And then you have other areas of the community that benefited from that TIF project also.
Okay, good. Another question, if a community is just starting to get into utilizing tax increment financing, what advice would you have for them?
Get ready for a battle. And you have to have the political courage, and you can't have public officials that are going to wilt on the vine when people fill the chambers, and they will. And it's an educational process. It's not something worst thing you do is try to shove it down their throat. You try to get them on board, try to educate them, try to get them to understand, bring somebody in that's been through a project before from a different neighboring community or something, and tell them all the benefits that resulted as a result of it. And some people just tend to hate incentive programs. One of my favorite things I like to do is, especially when you got a rowdy crowd that refuses to understand, I said, okay, if you've been around Nebraska for a while, you probably have some in your family in a farming ranching background, or perhaps you came from that background yourself. Or like in North Platte, maybe you came from a railroad family. Well, the three greatest incentive programs ever invented in the United States was the Homestead Act, the Kincaid Act, and the Transcontinental Railroad Act. Those were all incentive programs. And how many of you would be here today if you didn't use that incentive? This is about making your community better. It's about growing your community. How about helping keep your school system in place, because you're going to bring more people and more families, more population. And if you don't care enough about your community to do this, then nobody's going to care enough from the outside to come and invest their dollars in. You just got to use those kind of arguments. And the political courage, it is more than it's highly underrated. I'll put it that way.
As you mentioned earlier, you have the battle scars to prove it. So
I do.
Yeah. So another question, in your experience, how have the school districts, who are the major property tax benefactor, responded to tax increment financing?
I've been fortunate that schools districts that I've dealt with have been very supportive and understanding. Most of them have plenty of capacity in their schools because they were built in different eras where they had more student population, and they need to fill those spots. And as long as students get per capita gets state funding for students, that is how they also help operate their budgets. And you're creating new value in the community that wouldn't be there, that someday it's going to be on their tax rolls. I know there are communities who schools fight this. They don't like it. So you got to get them on board early on, get them to understand the merits, the values of it, and make sure that they're at least in a neutral position and not a adversary, trying to stop it.
Okay. Yeah, some are not in favor of it due to capacity or lack thereof. So,
Yeah.
And not a full understanding of the process. So
I always tell them, aren't you in the education business? You should educate yourself on the value of this type of project.
okay, good. Another question, what are the issues with monetizing the TIF bond with a bank loan?
Well, like on the that's why they the traditional TIF is based on bonding. The bonding process itself vets out the strengths and weaknesses of the project, and if it could be bonded, most banks will finance it. And in the case of micro TIF, the 2022 amendment basically allows the bank to use the projected TIF proceeds as collateral within the loan.
Okay. Michelle, not a question, but she wants to share their example of what's happening with the TIF project. It's closing and the tax income from the development has gone from $120 a year to over $298,000. So the school's portion will be a nice chunk of that. And so, the key is waiting for the time period to elapse for that to kick in and the taxes to go back to the varying taxing entities. So great conversation, great questions. Does anybody else have a comment or a question for Gary that you'd like to pose?
Corey, did you see that Andrew Willis shared the workforce housing limits for 2024 at 300,000 for owner occupied and 235 for rental?
Per unit
Awesome.
for rental.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
So
good to
those
know.
were entered in the chat message, and yes,
Great.
thank you, Andrew, for doing that update for us. So yeah. So what other thoughts, comments, questions? Gary, you used a lot of TIF, I think, to convert the old mall into a mixed use of housing and commercial. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that was one of 4 programs we used, but they all were important for that project to move forward. And it's just, you saw it, so you understand what we're talking about. But it took an old concrete dinosaur with that was built in 1970, was down to 25% occupancy, and now it's just a bustling, going place that has like 20 brand new businesses in it, creating a lot of new commerce in town and retail, and it's bright and shiny. It has 96 apartments right in the middle of the development, and a mixed-use development with retail below it. And it's just a knock your socks off. You expect to see those things in the Omaha, the Lincolns, the Denvers, but you don't expect to see them in the North Platts of the world. And so it's a cool thing. Would not have happened without the 4 incentive programs, including TIF. And amazingly, they all passed by a 4-3 vote at the city council level. 1 vote would have went the other way. We'd still have the old concrete dinosaur. And as a result of that project, the city's retail sales have doubled in the last 3 years. It's just amazing. It's just one of many things we've done, but it certainly is a major driver on retail sales.
Yeah, so I have a question in the chat box. I want to follow up with you a little bit. What's the demographic of those that are occupying those units, those housing units?
Yeah, it's interesting dialogue. It's everything from the traveling nurse to railroad workers. We have a lot of railroad workers in North Platte that we're staying in motels. Now it's like a home away from home for them. You've got the CEO of the Sustainable Beef Processing Plant lives there. You got a lot of newcomers. It's a cool place for the kids, that young kids who want to be right in the middle of the action, and they don't, if they want to go to the local lounge or whatever, they don't have to worry about driving anywhere. It's right there on site. You go shopping, you can do about everything you want right there. So it's such a wide mix. There's some seniors that have retired there, sold their homes. So it's just a nice mix of a lot of different people, and it filled up just almost overnight. And they want to build a second phase now in another side of the mall area. So that'll be the next process. Yeah.
So a community within a community.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah. So Amir has a question. Would you suggest hiring an entity or someone specific to get a TIF project completed?
Yeah, it depends if you've had a study done or not yet, but there's some really good ones in Nebraska. I'm reluctant to throw all the names out there because I'm going to forget somebody, but Hannah Keelan, Marvin Associates, I think it's called First Five or something, that they've done quite a few across the state of Nebraska. I know in the eastern part of the state there's more, but I'm just talking about the ones who have done the work out here. They do very, very good work. The studies bear themselves out. A lot of good facts and figures in there that you can use. And then it's trying to get a developer to believe in your community, but taking those necessary steps, prepare it. The closer you get it to being what we would call in the development world shovel ready, TIF ready, community prepared to make development happen, the easier it's going to be for you to entice that developer.
Okay. And it's a job that you have to wear many hats in, I'm sure, such as you do. Yeah. Yeah. So Jeff put in the chat box, I'll just draw all of your attention. There's a TIF training for individuals in the Omaha area on December 9th. He's got a link there. And Jeff, I apologize. I live in the world of acronyms, but I'm not sure what ULI stands for. So if you would like to elaborate, feel free to open your microphone and tell us more about that. Okay.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay, great. So ULI is Urban Land Institute, and they have a chapter now starting in Omaha that's based out of the Kansas City chapter. So if you see there, it is under the Kansas City, so we're a subset of that, but they're starting out. They promote development. They have developers, engineers, architects, bankers, everybody that's involved with development. It's a very good organization, national organization across the United States called Urban Lands Institute that promotes high design and sustainability, as well as encouraging individuals as to how to fund their projects. So it's called But For Two. It's starting next December 9th at UNO.
Okay. And it's a live event.
That's correct.
Okay,
From
on campus
9
at
a.m.
UNO.
9
Okay.
a.m. to noon.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for explaining that. Okay. Any last questions or thoughts, comments for Gary today? Well, hearing none, I'm going to just say thank you to Gary. I don't know what he's done the rest of the week, but he devoted his time to us yesterday and again today, and he has made North Platte the community that it is. In the 9 years you've been there, Gary, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, okay.
Time flies pretty fast.
Yeah, for sure. So, reach out to Jeff if you want to know more about that training coming up in December. And we gave you Gary's information. But again, thank you, Gary. Just to wrap
You're
up
welcome.
here, Today's webinar will be posted on our website probably sometime tomorrow. So you can access that plus any of our other 74 webinars. Today is number 75 through our website, HomeNE.us. It is a searchable website. So if you can't remember maybe Gary's name, but you know, he spoke on TIF, you put TIF in the search box, and Gary and others who've maybe spoken on the topic will come to the surface for you to check out. So good, useful resource for you. So, and then we do not have a webinar in December. We push pause for the month of December. So our next webinar will not be till January 16th, the third Thursday in 2025, which just sounds hard to believe. So, but we look forward to having all of you join us again back in January, and just want to say thank you to all of you as we close. Thank you for being a part of HomeNE. We started this in February of 2018, and we're still going strong here in November of 2024. So that's only possible because of all of you who either devote your time to be presenters or to just listen in and participate as you can. So we appreciate it. So Gary, any last thoughts?
No, I just compliment you for being so proactive in putting these types of series of webinars together. I think it's very valuable, and sharing thoughts and projects and information with people is probably one of the most valuable things there is to do. So compliments to your organization and you and Sharon for doing everything that you do to make it work.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing you again soon, and as well as everyone else. So thanks to all of you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome.